Marshall was known in the healthcare space, but there's 100 million Americans who don't know anything about the healthcare space, and those are the people that we're really trying to serve.
Thanks for tuning in to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Let's go make healthcare better together. I'm here with Sonja Allen. How are you?
Good.
The Marshall Allen Project, right, is the business itself. Super excited, thrilled today to get to chat with you. We were just getting some of the background and some of the story, and I apologize to have you do a lot of it again, but just wanted to give you a chance to give your story first, and then we'll pick it up with the Marshall Allen Project and the MAC as well here in a minute. But why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so, I was married to Marshall for almost 30 years, and he passed away last May. And so it's been a journey. It's been interesting, but just in the last 10 months since he passed away, been developing the Marshall Allen Project and the resources and tools that we have available. But aside from that, we moved to Texas about 3 years ago. We were in New Jersey. He worked at ProPublica for 10 years. Lived out there for a while, and then prior to that, we're in Las Vegas, and then
the Vegas,
and then
life in Vegas, yeah.
LA. We were in LA for 6 years, and then started out our married life as missionaries. Actually, we worked in Nairobi, Kenya, with a youth organization called Young Life, and worked. So I actually grew up in Africa. My parents are also in ministry.
What part of Africa?
In Kenya.
In Kenya, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And so Marshall and I, when we moved there, we worked in the high school that I had gone to when I was a kid. And so
Can we touch on that for a minute? I'd like to hear kind of what it's like to grow up in Kenya, and then were you back and forth between the States and Kenya, or did you spend a majority of your young life in Kenya?
Yeah, most of it. So I was born in Norway. My parents were there 7 years. Okay. I was there 4 years, and then I was about 5 when we moved to Nairobi, and I started first grade there and through end of my sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
And back in those days, you didn't really come back and forth a whole lot.
You didn't? Okay.
No. We were 3 years on, and then we would come home for 3 months, and then go back for another 3 years, and then we'd come home for like a furlough,
Where
like a
was
9-month.
home then in the States?
Well, so my dad's from Iowa, my mom's from Minnesota.
Okay.
And so when I was in 7th grade, I lived in Minneapolis for 9 months. And it wasn't until like when we left Nairobi to move back, it was kind of like, pick a state. I'm sure my parents would think about it differently, but that was my recollection of it. And anyway, so they ended up in Denver, Colorado. And so for the last 40 years or whatever, that was home.
Okay.
And Marshall was born in Oregon, but he moved to Colorado when he was like 4. So all of his family and 90% of my family now has been in Colorado since the 80s. And but growing up in Kenya, it was the best.
Was it? Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. It was kind of the golden age of Nairobi. They had gotten their independence from the British, and it was a relatively small town. It was probably 500,000 people, and it was safe. And Kenya is just stunningly beautiful. And I grew up going to the beach and going on safari, and have lots of fun animal stories and camping stories. And
well, was there within the missionary work, was there specific projects or things you guys were doing? Was it schools? Was it building churches? What was the type of work you guys did?
So my parents work for an organization called the Navigators, which is primarily about discipleship. And so they were working with university students and developing leaders and disciples in that context. And my dad was the country director, and so he was kind of leading the work there. And the goal really for him was to raise up the nationals staff so that it would be run by Kenyans, for Kenyans, and not necessarily like have the missionaries there from out of the country. So that process took about 10 years. Okay. And then when we left, it was, turned over to the national people there, and they took the ministry on from that point, and it's still a thriving ministry. So my parents have been with Navigators for, I don't know, I think it's like 63 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so then you moved back to Colorado and established sort of a new home, right? I guess that's safe to say. What can I ask the transition going from most of your life spending in Nairobi to coming to Denver, Colorado? Did you find difficulty adjusting, or did you enjoy your time in the States? And
I had a hard time adjusting.
Did you?
I
Okay.
did. I didn't really feel American, and I didn't
Interesting.
really want to be American. I am American. My parents are American, even though I wasn't born here or raised here. But you know, there's this thing called third culture kid,
Okay.
and it is an identity that is like your national identity is American because that's your where you're from, your parents are from. But then you are raised in a second culture, which for me would have been Kenya. But I'm clearly not Kenyan, but I really don't feel like I'm American.
Interesting.
And so you end up with this kind of identity that is a mixture of different things. And you become a person who is very adaptable, who can function in a lot of different environments. It's a multicultural, cross-cultural type of situation that, navigating America. I mean, I'd never seen a football game. We didn't have cheerleaders. I didn't grow up eating McDonald's.
Yeah.
And then just music and television and movies. And even Marshall would laugh at me because there was a huge gap in my kind of entertainment culture
Some references
knowledge.
that you probably didn't get. Yeah, yeah.
That, TV shows that you're like, oh, Leave It to Beaver. And I'm like, yeah, I mean,
No idea what you're talking about.
yeah, like I know what it is now, but it just wasn't part of my childhood.
Yeah.
It wasn't the way that I grew up at all.
Did you find rebelling a little bit against this being transplanted in this culture that you didn't feel connected with, or no?
What I realized, I didn't feel like I rebelled necessarily, but what I realized is that American high school kids are really geographically very isolated.
Yeah.
So you grow up in the States, and most people probably don't travel. They don't really go outside of their own context. And so their worldview and their knowledge of what the rest of the world is like is pretty limited.
Sure.
Especially, back then, right?
Pre-internet, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
pre-internet.
We lived the pre-internet days. Yeah,
Right.
totally get that.
So I think for me, what I realized is that as I entered into American culture, people would, they'd say, oh, did you, ride elephants to school, and did you spear monkeys for lunch? And I'm like, no, like we had a car and I rode
Yeah.
a school bus. And,
Yeah.
but the level of, and for me, I really, really loved Africa and I loved Kenya. And it felt like I was exposing myself to people who didn't have an understanding of it and who didn't really care. They were interested in their own thing. And so what you realize is that you either become a chameleon where you just blend into what everybody's doing and you talk and you behave like what everybody else is doing, or you stand out as separate and unique and, nobody understands me kind of thing. And
Which
so
path did you take?
well, I think what I did was more to blend in,
Okay.
but also hold very closely this other part of me that every once in a while I would meet somebody who was actually interested and like genuine and just didn't think, because when we first moved, people were like, oh, you're from Africa? And, I was like this anomaly, right? But one of the things that was so unique when I met Marshall is that he was so fascinated. He was like, that is so interesting. And what is it like? And what was it like to grow up there? And he wanted to know all about it. And he really was one of the first people that I had met in the States who really seemed to care about how I grew up.
Well, how did you guys meet then?
So we met, kind of funny story. We didn't meet. We saw each other at a dance. So we were both really into country dancing.
Okay.
Marshall had learned how to country dance from a friend of his, and who was actually from Texas. And I was very anxious to learn how to dance. I didn't really know. And I went to the University of Colorado all 4 years, and he was at Metro State College for the first 2 years. So it was the end of our sophomore year, and he came to a dance up at Boulder with a friend of mine. And he was like, I saw him there, and I knew the girl, but we weren't super close. And I was like, gosh, I really wanted to go meet him and dance with him and like hang out with him, but it was kind of awkward. So, and she had told me, oh, my friend Marshall's coming to this dance. And then he saw me at the dance, and he asked his buddy, like, who is that? And he said, Sonja Van Wyk, that's my maiden name. So, but we never spoke.
Okay.
So fast forward like another 8 months, and Marshall was a whitewater rafting and mountaineering guide in the summers. And I had worked at a camp, and our staff from the camp went rafting at the end of the summer as like a little staff bonus. And so I'm in the boat going down the river in the raft, and I hear someone yelling, Sonja! And I was like, and I turn around, and Marshall, who was always like really smooth with the ladies, you know, like in high school and college, he was like, all of a sudden, he was like, oh my gosh, we haven't met. And he goes, I'm Marshall. I saw you at a dance in Boulder.
That's funny. The realization set in, like, you may not remember him.
Right. Like, oh, we've actually never talked, and she's gonna think that there's this like random stalker out there. And everybody in my boat who I'd worked with all summer, they were like, who is that? And I said, well, I think that's Marshall. You know, anyway, it was kind of just embarrassing, but humorous. And at the end of the trip, he came up to me like super cool, you know, and he's like, oh, I'm transferring up to Boulder. I'm sure I'll see you up there. And well, we ended up both being English majors, and we were both involved in the same ministry. And so just became friends. He actually ended up, when he first moved there, I kind of assumed that he would, you know, ask me out or be interested in me, but it turns out he'd already had a girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
And so I was like, okay, noted. Like, you know, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But because we had class together and we were involved in the same ministry, we had mutual friends, and I didn't get to dance with him, but I got to dance with some of his friends. And so we were very much in the same kind of group and same, you know, connection. And then they dated and broke up about 6 months later. And then, I mean, gosh, in fact, it was really interesting because Marshall told his roommate, Dave, he was like, I just want to put this on the record. We've never gone out on a date, but he's like, I'm going to marry Sonja.
He said that?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's like, if I don't marry her, you have to promise me, you know, never to
Don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
But he said, and so I think it was really clear to us really from the very beginning. So we dated about 7 months, and we got engaged.
That's cool. When was when did you guys get married?
August 21st, 1994.
94. Okay, very cool.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, $1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
Cool. And so then life together starts, right? And so I presume you mentioned a bunch of travel. That's probably normal for somebody in his profession, right? Like you move where you get opportunities. So like what was the first step into working life for both of you guys?
Well, I think when we first got married, we really didn't know what we wanted to do. In fact, I remember asking him, like, you know, what do you want to be, you know, when you got out of college? And he's like, I just want to be a dad.
Oh, he said that? Okay.
Yeah. And which I was like, I mean, that's amazing. But I'm like, but what are you going to do, you know, for work? And I think from my experience growing up, I really wanted to do missions and do ministry. And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. And so we ended up having the opportunity to move back to Kenya and work, you know, like I said, doing youth ministry in my high school. And he really loved that. So we were there 3 years. And our goal was really to do that long term, that we thought it was going to be, you know, this is what we're going to do. So he wanted to come back and get more theological training and go to seminary.
Okay.
So we moved back, ended up living in Colorado Springs where the Young Life headquarters is, and he worked there and started classes. And then the program that he was with, it was at Fuller Theological Seminary, which is based in Pasadena, California. And so the program that he was in had a residency requirement. And so we moved to Pasadena in order for him to complete his degree. Well, in the meantime, Young Life, the ministry was kind of changing, and so it wasn't something that we were going to be able to move forward with. And he had started freelance writing just to kind of pay the bills on the side. And he was like, I really love writing. He was always really good at writing. He was natural at it. But I don't know why nobody ever was like, you know, you should do journalism. Or so we move out to LA, and in LA, everybody's a writer. You know, everybody's got a script and a plan and a program. And so he was like, wait, you're a writer? Like you make a living? And anyway, long story short, I said, I think you should be a writer. And so he graduated from seminary and he got a job at a newspaper.
What did he start writing about at that point?
It was a twice weekly little newspaper, and he was writing about courts, and so he would interview the mayor and all the little issues that were happening in town. He was there maybe 6 months, and then he got promoted. He worked for a little bit bigger newspaper called the Glendale News Press, and then he worked at the Pasadena Star News, so newspapers are very hierarchical. So you start with a small one, and then you get a little bigger and so forth. And at the Pasadena Star News, he wrote about crime and religion.
Okay.
And then, applied for, several years, because Pasadena is just beautiful but crazy expensive. And by that time, we had the 3 boys, and so it was like, okay, we gotta get out of here. We gotta figure out, a way to make this happen. And then he got hired at the Las Vegas Sun. So we moved to Vegas in 2006. And
were you working at the time, or no? You were staying home?
No,
okay.
I was home with the boys.
Yeah.
And then in Las Vegas, his editor came and said, "Hey, Marshall, we really want you to cover healthcare."
Yeah.
And he said, "I can't imagine anything more boring." And so. And then, that's what he did the rest of his life.
Well, to be fair, and I shared that sentiment when I was younger as well about healthcare or insurance, right? I think they often get sort of labeled as one thing, health insurance, healthcare. I just thought, oh man, selling insurance, that sounds horrible.
Right.
And then I think probably I have to suspect, like Marshall, over time you discover what it really means. And there's a lot of really interesting things, human interest pieces, a lot of, challenging stuff that people go through. Obviously, it's often the most challenging parts of folks' lives, at least in the States. And so you go, wow, there's so much here that I can spend a lifetime and be interested, be curious, but also try to solve problems on behalf of people. So after his initial response of boring, like did he uncover that it actually was pretty interesting?
He was completely fascinated because the things that were happening, especially in Vegas, I mean, it's around the country, of course, but there was some really egregious things happening in healthcare in Las Vegas. And so he said it was like finding good stories was like picking low-hanging fruit. He uncovered a doctor who created the biggest hepatitis C outbreak in Las Vegas. The guy was using single-use vials on multiple patients.
Oh, goodness.
And created this huge outbreak. I mean, so he covered just some really incredible stories here, and then he worked on a series called Do No Harm, which was about patients getting harmed in hospitals in Vegas, and they had this data set that they were looking at to see how many of these patients were having to go back in after surgeries. Not, because of things that actually went wrong during the surgery. And then, of course, they're harmed or they get really sick or they're disabled and then they're left with massive debt and massive bills and no way to pay for it. Nobody ever apologizes. Nobody acknowledges that they did the wrong thing. And so that series of stories won him a lot of attention and big awards and that kind of led to the job at ProPublica in New York.
So you moved from Vegas to New York. I know a lot about, at least from talking to him, ProPublica. You obviously put him really, I'd say, on the national map as well. But then they brought him in to specifically continue to cover healthcare at that point. Okay. And was it similar format of uncovering the fraud, waste, and abuse and all these horrible stories, or was there more involvement in other parts of healthcare when he moved?
It was really just those kind of deep dive investigative stories. And so it wasn't, I don't think it was like, you have to do this one thing. As a reporter, you really have your sources, you hear what stories are, you're kind of discovering things on your own. But it was always investigative. He always wanted to do, wasn't just, reporting what's happening, but it was finding what's really going on underneath the surface. And like he used to say, like he'd have a conversation with someone and they would, even mention just kind of an off detail, or sometimes it was after the interview is over and he'd be like, wait, hold on a second. And he'd start to like ask questions. He said it was just like pulling a thread. One thing would lead to another, and then he would uncover some of these just incredible stories. So he was great. He was amazing at talking to people. He loved people. I think he was genuinely curious and interested. And that just he was trusted. He had a lot of integrity. He never communicated anything that was erroneous or that was inflated, or he was absolutely devoted to being accurate and not presenting any. It would have been tempting to be like, oh, it was, this bigger thing. And he was like, no, this is actually what it is. And so
yeah, it's probably
accuracy was a big
unnecessary to
part.
be salacious because in this realm, because I think the stories in and of themselves are incendiary. And so if you just stick to the truth, right, then you also don't have to defend yourself, right, later on as well. And so he ultimately spent 10 years there. When did the book Never Pay the First Bill come into being? Was it during that time or was it post ProPublica?
Yeah, it was during that time. He had done a whole series on like the insurance and what was really happening. And he had interviewed a lot of people and kind of been able to peer under the rock, and see like, oh, these are the backdoor deals. These are some of the things that are happening. And this is why healthcare continues to go up, why the cost of healthcare continues to rise. And then he learned from interviewing a lot of people and also just from kind of his own desire to see like, well, what can we do about this? And what are the tools in our tool belt? And what can actually be done to kind of help people navigate the system? And so he had a book idea and he pitched it. He actually got rejected by every single publisher.
Really?
Yeah.
Was there a common theme as to why? I can't imagine, but what was the reason?
I think people thought it wasn't going to be interesting,
Okay.
but ended up the very last agent that was interested in the book was at Penguin Random House. And she was the one who said, maybe you should try and write this as like a how-to book, like a guide, a guerrilla guide. And he was like, that's a great idea. So he reframed the book according to her ideas and suggestions, and they acquired the book, and it's been great.
Yeah.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
That's amazing. And so was there a common theme, or if you will, or like you taking what he did at ProPublica and the stories he wrote there, was it mostly designed to be an accumulation of those stories put together in a cohesive form that turns into a how-to guide, or was he also uncovering new information as he went and writing that book as well?
Yeah, I would say both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the stories that he had covered with ProPublica were kind of the foundation of what he was utilizing, and then as he was writing the book, he was continuing to find out information. So it was a compilation of both things. I think one of the things that was so great about the book is that it was really actionable. It was like, here's what you can do.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know what other resources are like that out there, but people found it so helpful. And it's his tactics and the ideas that he had. And he would always say, this is not simple, but it is doable.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a victim. You don't have to, you get a bill and you call and they say, well, you call the doctor's office and they say, well, call the insurance company. And they say, well, call the doctor's office, and you get the runaround and you can't. And so it was like this frustrating. And not only that, but the price of healthcare continues to go up and people are suffering and they're, unable to pay their bills, or like their healthcare costs go up so high. So they might get a small salary boost and all of it gets taken up by, their additional healthcare costs. And so he wanted to equip people so that they didn't feel like victims, and so they knew what they could do and how to take care of their
Well,
healthcare
to me,
needs.
it's what I liked about it is you mentioned, I kind of can think of it as empowering the individual, right? Because there are patient advocates out there that do an incredible job walking one single individual through a process, which is amazing, right? That's difficult to scale if the individual is not empowered to do that themselves. And yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's going to be a headache. Yes, it's going to take a lot of time, but you can do it. And I think his vision, at least what I can glean from it, is to arm you and me and anybody in the world with the information they need to do it for themselves. And there's power in that, which I appreciate. And so then I guess I want to ask you, during this time, you probably never imagined you were getting into healthcare, right? I mean, but you couldn't escape it. I'm sure Marshall would come home every single day and talk about it. So you got trained, you got educated in what was going on, but you couldn't imagine yourself doing it yourself, right? Okay.
No, goodness, no. No, I never anticipated this by any stretch of the imagination, but I did. I would read all of Marshall's articles, and I would edit his articles.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, not edit like in a professional sense, but he always wanted me to read everything.
That's cool.
And I think to some degree I was kind of like the common man, like you're average, so you read this, and does this make sense to you? He never called me average. That was my.
I get what you're saying though, because it does need to be in layman's terms. It needs to be
Yes.
understandable to somebody that is not living in this world every single day.
Exactly. So and then as the boys got older and things like that, I was able to travel with him a little bit and met.
Yeah, I met you in Austin. Yeah.
Yep, met you and met lots of other folks, and that was really. Of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was preparation, because we've talked about healthcare, and I've heard him do these podcasts, and I've heard him speak multiple times, and I've read his book multiple times, and I've read all of his articles, and so I was kind of getting educated unknowingly, really, and so it's not unfamiliar to me. I don't consider myself a healthcare expert by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like what I know is what Marshall talked about, and it's really his knowledge that I'm seeking to move forward. But I know Marshall, and I can communicate what was important to him and his values, and I can help to move it forward. And I know Marshall's contribution obviously is complete, but there's things that we can add to his body of work and really make a difference in helping people navigate healthcare. So,
But yeah, I mean, he was clearly, obviously, universally liked, myself included. But I think it was you have a human being who's the vessel for all this that everybody loves. But it's also the work that he was doing was so impactful. And so, if we want to talk about now that you're picking up the mantle, I think everybody, at least that knew him and understood his work, wanted to see it continue. But did you have immediate thoughts about that? Obviously, there's a grieving process, and you've got the boys to think about, but did you think, I'm going to continue to do his work as well, or did you think it would end up maybe sunsetting and going away initially?
So I didn't think it was going to go away, because he had created this tool, and we can talk about that, but I didn't know how to move it forward, because I felt, I wasn't him, right? So I was like, well, I don't know how to talk about these kind of things. I'm not going to move the needle with my own knowledge. I can only move forward. But I think the thing that really convinced me was the outpouring of people from LinkedIn messages, emails, people who attended his services, his funeral, of people saying, gosh, we don't want to let this die. What can we do? How can we help? We want to move this forward. People who have created Marshall Allen Legacy Awards and Allen Award. It's been actually pretty unbelievable. I think you don't really know your impact on people until when you pass away. And then like the stories that I've heard of people who are like, even in the week that he died, there were probably 25, 30 people who were like, I literally talked to him this week.
Yeah.
He was so engaged with people. He had a massive capacity to communicate with people. And so I think people loved him and they trusted him.
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt. Yeah. Again, I told you the same. And it's interesting. You mentioned the timing. We were actually writing I don't know if you've seen the Tom Broker skits that I do. It's kind of a silly satirical version of an insurance broker that's doing all the wrong things to try to self-aggrandize and make money. And so we just poke fun, and it's meant to be tongue in cheek. Well, we wrote one with Marshall as being the Marshall, and I don't think he didn't like the concept because we had this idea he was going to be an actual marshal dressed up like a sheriff's marshal.
Okay.
And so we were going to rework it, and then of course that was I think about a week or two prior, and it was obviously disappointing on many fronts. But I'm sure there's 1,000 stories that are similar to that. And so now, after you hear this outpouring, like, what is the steps to actually take to continue the business that you were partially involved in, but not actively? And the Mac, I want to hear about the Mac that you developed. There's the Marshall Allen Project. He's got the Substack. He's got all these things going on simultaneously. And how do you start to pick up and figure out which one to pour into and where to start even?
Yeah. So it really started with the Mac, which is this AI tool that Marshall found about a month before he died. And it was, he was all excited. And he's like, I found this thing where I can clone myself. And I was like, okay, random. But he was really excited about it. And I was like, well, what are you going to do with that? And how do you use that? And what are, but he's like, I don't know, but I really, really want to do this.
Okay.
And so he downloaded like 475 articles and his book and podcasts and, his speaking notes and just anything that he had contributed. Really, it was like his healthcare brain, you could say, input it into the Mac. And we call it the Mac Marshall Allen clone. Yeah.
Marshall Allen clone. Okay.
Yeah. And
so this is like a digital avatar, if you will, of all his writings, videos, podcasts, et cetera, just all fed into a large language model, I guess. Then to what? To learn and replicate his speech patterns and his voice and things like that?
Yeah, he recorded his voice.
Oh, literally his physical voice as well.
He really, he did. And then, so he put all the information in there, and then he started asking questions, and then it kind of learns, AI learns as you go. It learns what the responses are, where to, pull the information from. I mean, I don't know anything about the technology behind it. I just know that he worked with it for over a month, training it, asking it questions, making sure that the responses were accurate. There's links to all kinds of resources, many of which are recommended in his book. And then, he passed away. And I think that the motivation for me was that he gave of himself freely to help people.
Yes.
I mean, he would speak at a conference and be like, here's my email, And I'm like, what are you doing? And people would email him in droves, and he would spend hours on the phone talking with people. Okay, here's what you do next, and here's what you do next. And he didn't do the work for them, but he would advise them on next steps and let's write this email and let's try this kind of thing. And then he would write the victory stories of people who succeeded in fighting their bills in his Substack newsletter. So the heart behind it, there was a study that had come out that said 100 million Americans are in medical debt. And so in the last summer after he passed away, Chris San Juan, who's my business partner and helping me with it, we were talking about this, and it was like we decided to just start a foundation, a nonprofit.
Okay. And
the heart of the nonprofit was the Mac, that there was going to be this AI tool, and it was going to be available and accessible. And the mission or the goal of the Mac was to help the 100 million Americans with medical debt. And that's kind of where it started. And so we kind of created a website. I had the opportunity to go to Health Rosetta and talk about Marshall and mentioned and talked about the Mac. And since then, we've built a whole business out of it and a development. There's licensing available. We can house the clone on anybody's website.
Oh, really? Okay.
We can integrate it with their other, health benefits that they're providing for their employees. There's a lot of opportunity and learning. And we have, you can go on our website at marshallallenproject.org. It's there. It's available. You can test it. You can try it out. You can ask it questions, and which we invite people to do because the more information we get, the better. But so that was kind of where that came from. And I think I remember after he passed away, and it started with people who would say, they would want to bring me a meal or they would want to, help in some kind of way. And I just felt in my heart, I was like, this is just a season where I'm just going to say yes.
Okay.
I thought, I'm just going to say yes. I don't know what life looks like now. I mean, Marshall died so suddenly. It was so totally shocking. And, so Dave Chase had reached out and asked if I'd be willing to speak at Health Rosetta. And I was like, I mean, I've never spoken. And I thought, just say yes.
Yes.
And so it really kind of started with that. And then just being able to have those conversations and those opportunities. And I think for me, although I don't feel like I'm a healthcare expert, I feel like I'm a Marshall expert. And so it's been a joy, honestly, and a gift to be able to talk about him and to remember him and to share. He worked so hard to learn all of this stuff about healthcare, to create these tools and resources that we have available. And he really, I've already said it, but he really wants to help people.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I want to move this forward. I feel like there's still so much good that can be done. And with the MAC in particular, it can continue to learn and grow beyond, Marshall's knowledge. And so it has a lot of capacity.
So in what ways can it continue to evolve, right? So I imagine people are listening right now and they're going to go, well, how can I help? What can I do, right? So what are some of the things that people can do to assist evolving the capabilities of the MAC, if you will, or the knowledge base that it's deriving from so it can continue to stay relevant in the market?
Yeah, we're always vetting resources. There's a lot of tools to help people navigate healthcare. People don't necessarily know. They don't know what they don't know, right? And so some of it is just word of mouth, getting the word out, telling people about it. I think it's an incredible resource for employers. We have licenses available where people can help us and help the foundation by having a license that gives them the MAC on their website that can be accessible to their employees. It will continue to learn from the victory stories that we're continuing to write and other, websites, resources that we vet that are going to be included in the MAC as the...
Yeah, because you don't want it to be fed with bad information or wrong information as well.
No, and people have been amazing to me. So many people have reached out who have said, oh my goodness, I knew Marshall. We worked on this project. We worked on this project. I have a plethora of experts, of very smart people who really understand healthcare, who are guiding and directing and making recommendations. So I'm definitely not doing this alone.
Yeah.
And it really is an adventure. It's just literally one day at a time.
Yeah. I'd imagine, does it have an app-based version? You mentioned on the website too, but there's an app-based version.
It's actually, it's kind of cool. It's not actually an app, but if you go on to marshallallenproject.org, then there's, you can go down to the share button on your phone, and then you say add to home screen, and it pops up, and it looks exactly like an app, but it's technically a bookmark.
Yeah.
But when you click on it, it takes you right to the MAC, and you can ask it, you can talk to it verbally, and he talks to you. You can text, obviously. The MAC speaks 115 languages, which Marshall certainly did not.
Crazy, okay.
So if you do have a verbal conversation with it, it will send you a transcript to your email of everything that was covered.
Really?
So you have all the information. And, for people who, like employers maybe who have a large Spanish-speaking constituency, or, it's a great resource because healthcare is hard for Americans to navigate. Imagine not, being fluent in the language and trying to ask these questions and trying to understand what an EOB is or, all that.
Not to mention, I'm sure there's some things that don't even directly translate because they're jargon that we've created in English in our industry. Like there's not a direct translation perhaps, which has got to be really difficult to make sense of. I mean, I feel sometimes like I'm not speaking English when I talk about some words we use. So that's really cool. And I was thinking the application too, there's programs out there like a Health Joy benefit wallet, things like that, where people are housing their company's benefits in one single place, and there's care navigation and things like that. But sometimes it does come down to, look, this event has already happened. Now what do I do? And you don't always get the answer from your director of HR or benefits advisor. Oftentimes it's like, I don't even know what to do. So this could fill out a nice little void in that understanding of how to navigate our system.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
That, and also, like, I've even had some companies who have said, we want to actually give this tool to our patient advocates and to our account managers, because as people are calling them for advice and whatever, they can be on the Mac. I mean, I had one guy tell me he was on the phone with his insurance company and he was on the Mac at the same time, asking questions simultaneously and getting advice on, wait, you need to ask this question or you need to find out what this is, and was able to navigate his bill at the same time, being on the Mac. There was a TikTok video of a guy who had a conversation in California about his bill and how it was charged higher because he had insurance. So we took that conversation and put it through the Mac, and Marshall, or the Mac, responded and said, here are some of the steps. This is this law that was in California. It explained it and what the background was. So it's interesting to kind of see that. I mean, that was just in retrospect, kind of like a test to see, how the Mac would respond. But it's right now, it's obviously all of Marshall's information. Marshall didn't know everything there is to know about healthcare. So it's not the only solution, but it's a solution. And it's practical, it's accessible, it's easy, it's just right there. You just click the button and it's like texting somebody.
Well, I was talking earlier about obviously not thinking I was going to be in this world of insurance, and obviously didn't as well. But I've also uncovered, you mentioned it's impossible to know everything. Mm-hmm. You can spend your entire lifetime in what we do and still feel like, man, I'm dumb. Because it's just like, it's so complex, it's so convoluted, it's constantly changing. So then to have something that can transcend your body of work and then become like an ongoing learning tool that then still helps people as things evolve, it's incredible. And then another piece of the equation was the Substack, right? So I was a follower, supporter of the Substack, and my understanding is you're continuing that work as well with some help, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't really know what to do with the Substack. He had, I think he had around 6,000 subscribers when he passed away. And, I get an email every time there's a new Substack subscriber. And I was getting, some weeks I would get over 100 in a week. And I'm thinking, well, he's not writing. Why are people, subscribing? And I didn't really know what to do about it. And then in December, I went on his website, and there's a place there where you can write a victory story. And there were 90 victory stories that had been written on his website. And obviously I still get emails today of people who are like, hey, Marshall, I heard about you, or I saw this, and they need advice. They're still coming to him and looking for that.
So describe to me, though, a victory story. What would you describe that as?
A victory story would be, I went to, like for example, we had one recently of a guy that was getting lab work done, like blood work done. And he realized that if he had used his insurance and he was billed like $900. Well, the cash price was, something like $300. So he was like, well, I don't want to use my insurance. I want to use this cash price. It ended up being this runaround of negotiating and going between, and they refused to allow him. And so he ended up suing in small claims court. And because he was in the right, and ended up getting all of that money refunded so that he was able to pay the lower price. So that's a victory. I mean, there's victory stories of, even like, for example, we were in Arkansas one time, we were swimming in a lake, my son got an ear infection, went to the urgent care, got some eardrops. Well, they sent us a bill a few weeks, 6 weeks or whatever it was later, and it was $250. So you kind of think, oh, whatever, and you would just pay it. And Marshall looked at it and he was like, hold on a second. And so he called the company and he's like, did you submit this to our insurance? And they said no. And they submitted to the insurance and it was $0. So sometimes it's literally that simple, Yes. It doesn't always have to be complicated. And then there's very, very complex cases that he helped people to resolve, whether it was overturning an insurance claim denial, where someone needed a surgery and they were being denied, and they had to fight for the approval so that
Yeah.
they would have it taken care of. Across the board. I mean, there's just so many
And
examples.
those are still coming in today, right?
They're still coming in.
And there's a gentleman that's helping write now new newsletters with
Yes.
the Substack, right? So tell me about that.
Yeah, so Andrew Gordon reached out this summer. I ended up meeting him at the Health Rosetta Conference. And when I found the treasure trove of stories that had been piling up, he's a writer, and I just, was super gracious and wanted to be a part and help. And so he took that database of stories and looked at them, and then we're going through them, and he's writing up these stories. And so we've relaunched the Substack now.
Okay, very cool.
And we've kind of restructured it and reframed it a little bit. And so if you are a paid subscriber, you have access to all of the, Marshall's newsletters in addition to the new ones that are being made. On a certain level, you have access to all of his healthcare literacy curriculum videos, which he had created in 2023, and then just all of the resources and things that we have available.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
It's exciting. It's obviously
Yeah.
a lot to manage, right?
Yes.
A lot going on. I'm curious, do any of the boys find themselves taking an interest to healthcare as well?
I think that they would be interested. I think they don't really know exactly where to fit in. But my youngest son, Cody, he used to do all these memes.
I was going to ask who was the
For
meme
Marshall.
maker. Marshall and I would talk about memes sometimes, and he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about trying these out," and my son's helping me create them, and I'm like, "That's cool. Memes work, so
Right.
keep doing it." And so Cody was the one doing that.
Cody was the one doing all the memes, and so he could just crank them out like nobody's business, and he would send them to Marshall, and then Marshall would kind of tweak them a little bit and edit them, and they would work back and forth on them. But yeah, we're getting Cody to relaunch the memes. So
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, I love that.
We're working
There's
on
some
that.
people I follow, and I dabble in memes sometimes. But one of the things that I like, and I think Marshall and I had this conversation, is that a meme allows you to convey sometimes a very complex idea in as few words as possible. And of course, it requires context, understanding the picture or what's being conveyed. But it's so powerful because the message is distilled down into its most basic form, and often, obviously, using humor, of course. But I think I've always found there's truth in comedy and in power and being
Yeah.
able to make somebody laugh, but you tell the truth during that process as well. And that actually, meme culture, memetic ideas, they move people in directions at scale. And so I think they get dismissed sometimes as a medium. I actually think they're an incredibly powerful medium as well.
I think humor draws people in like nothing else, and I feel like those memes probably got more reaction than a lot of his stories even.
Yeah.
People love them. And so so we want to bring that back. I just
There's just so many things.
Cody
Yeah.
back on the train here.
Yeah, so if we talk about picking up today, right? We're shooting what's today's date? 28th of March in 2025. Going forward, right? Are there some big initiatives that you guys are working on right now, or is it just to continue to maintain his entire body of work?
I think the biggest push and the initiative is to get the MAC out there, and we want to be funded for the foundation. We want to. The MAC, honestly, Marshall was our sole provider in our family, and so I felt like it's something that was left for me to provide for me and the boys, and so we're looking for partners, people who want to work with us.
Well, and so what capacity could we do that? Because obviously
Yeah.
my audience is, I think, we got little data about the demographics, but it's predominantly folks that work in the space, a
Yeah.
lot of the consultants that work in the space, but then people that revolve around the ecosystem that gets distributed through consultants. So again, somebody that's listening to this says, I want to help, I want to be involved.
Yeah.
What would that look like for you guys?
Multiple things. First of all, it's a nonprofit, so anybody can donate. That's available on our website. There's a link there. You can donate. Everything's obviously tax deductible as it's a nonprofit. And then second of all, for advisors or brokers who are, they can purchase a license that if they have a license to the MAC, that license is then available to all of the employers that they serve.
Okay.
And that way we can embed the MAC on anybody's website. We can include other benefits information that's relevant to their specific, employer. And that way it's available, because really Marshall was known in the healthcare space, but there's 100 million Americans who don't know anything about the healthcare space, and those are the people that we're really trying to serve. So right now, if it can be disseminated through brokers who are working with employers, that's a huge way for us to have that impact. And then second of all, we have like enterprise licenses for larger companies that are looking. We have some TPAs that are interested. There's, so there's a way, and then also there's patient advocates, and there's account managers and people who just for them personally it can be a useful tool.
Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time.
Well, and I also suspect that any individual that might be hearing this today and says, I want to use it for myself, has the ability to do so as well.
Correct.
Right.
It's available on our website.
Yeah, the challenge, right, is to how do we reach these people? I struggle with this every day. I talk about self-funding and those things. It's like, how do you reach as many people as possible that may or may not have interest and they don't realize they might not have interest? And so you've got to obviously be consistent in the messaging. You've got to be clear and simple in the messaging too, so it doesn't feel too mysterious that I just tune out because it sounds too hard. And I assume probably social media plays a role in that as well. Do you guys carry on LinkedIn accounts or Instagram accounts and things like that?
Yeah, we have primarily LinkedIn right now.
Yeah.
I haven't developed into Instagram and all of that, but yeah.
That's another
it's a whole nother beast.
World.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so then if we can keep continuing to look forward, what would you say you would like to accomplish with this work, right? If you look back and say, wow, we picked this up, we kept it going, and we did X, what would you like that to be?
We would love to really see people be able to save money on their healthcare. So our goal is to save $10 million in the first year. Okay. We did a little analysis of Marshall's Substack, his victory stories, and of the 106 victory stories that he wrote, there was a savings of $1.65 million. So the good thing about that is that that's a fraction of the people that he actually helped save money. I mean, there's people who have read his book, there's people who have done his videos, so that we don't necessarily know those stories, but of the ones that he communicated with personally, that's a pretty good return.
Yeah.
And so the thing I love about that too is that it proves that this does work. It's actionable, it's accessible, it does work. It can really, help make a difference. The other thing is that when people know even just simple questions, for example, I had a friend who's a teacher, she went to get an ultrasound and it billed her insurance like over $5,000 just for a simple ultrasound. They negotiated the rate down to maybe $3,700, and then her portion of the bill was $1,800. And I said, well, did you ask the cash price when you went to the imaging center for the ultrasound? And she's like, no, I didn't even know I was allowed to do that.
Exactly.
That's, we're talking like step one, right? We're talking very basic things, but that's the degree. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we're allowed to ask. We don't know what our rights are. And so our goal would be to empower people. There's always going to be a need for patient advocates. There's always going to be a need for, people to come along and help and that expertise. But there's so much that we can do to just empower people with those basic questions, with the knowledge of you don't have to be a victim. You don't have to be scared to go to the doctor and oh gosh, I hope I can pay my bill at the end of this whole thing. And so, the victory stories, I think, are proof that a lot of his methodologies really work and can save money. So our goal is those 100 million Americans.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a second ago, it's like most people don't even presume you can ask for a cash price. Because I think, unfortunately, the industry has trained us that I mean, if you've ever driven in Texas, you see the billboards, people smiling next to their logo of their insurance card that we know who I'm referring to. And they presume, well, I give my insurance card and it takes care of it.
Yeah.
And the issue is that oftentimes by doing that action, you drive up the price significantly.
Exactly.
And you don't realize, oh, I could pay cash, and cash price most times is exponentially lower than what the insurance reimbursement rates. And it doesn't make sense for those of us that spend time in this industry. It doesn't make sense why some entity with massive amounts of scale that's leveraging that scale to get the best discounts for you is 10 times more than if you were just to pay cash. And there's almost a stigma. I was actually having this conversation yesterday. There's a stigma associated with paying cash because that suggests you're uninsured and therefore unable to pay. So we give you a lower price and we stigmatize people for being in that situation. The reality is that is often the cheapest way to consume care, and you get the insurance completely out of the equation. So I'm completely with you. Is how do you inform people that that's even possible and get people to start doing that with regularity so that they know they can do that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think all it takes, honestly, is just even one example or one scenario. Because another guy that worked with Marshall, and he had this bill, and they were kind of trying to navigate it, and Marshall gave him some tips. And this guy is now like on fire. He's like armed and ready.
Yeah.
So he goes to the doctor, or anytime he gets care, he's like, okay, he knows what questions to ask. I mean, he's like all in, and I think that's what happens when you feel empowered. You're not scared or insecure anymore. You actually have real knowledge. I have people who have said, oh, I asked my doctor for the cash price, and they told me I wasn't allowed to use the cash price because I have insurance. And I'm like, that's not true. And here's why it isn't true. And here's where you can find this information and know your HIPAA rights. Well, who thinks about HIPAA?
Yeah.
I mean, your average consumer doesn't
that
know.
authority kind of equation. I don't know if it's a principal agent problem, but you go to some sort of authoritative entity and presume they're telling you the truth, that they know what they're talking about. And I wouldn't presume that person's necessarily intentionally lying. They just may not know. And if they say, well, no, you have to use your insurance, you can't pay cash, they're probably just misinformed. So how often is that happening on a daily basis across the country? And I don't suspect that somebody working for that hospital wants to take advantage of an individual in that situation. I think they're just naive to what the actual patient rights are. And it's sad to the state of affairs that we have to go educate and arm people what their actual rights are.
It's so true. I really don't think there may be some, bad eggs or whatever, but I think for the most part, I mean, insurance is extremely complicated. It's changing all of the time. The deductibles and the copays and all of the things that we have to navigate. So these people who work in hospitals and doctors' offices, I mean, they're having to navigate insurance across a broad range of plans and programs and individuals. And I think, it would be hard to always kind of know the right thing. But when you know that you have the right information, it's power.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you then, because I know Marshall is obviously active in the local government here in Texas. Do you find yourself getting into conversations about regulatory changes or bills that might be coming down? Have you found yourself on Capitol Hill or anything like that? Okay.
Not on Capitol Hill.
I wasn't sure what the relationship with Marty, if those kind of conversations ever happen or not. But, I do think we're at the point where I'm not a big government person, but I do think they can help in this equation. And so I wasn't sure if you were getting in those conversations.
Well, I know. I mean, some of Marshall's stories did lead to, transparency and some of those different things that got passed. And so I think he had an impact and an influence on some of those decisions that were made. And there was some legislation that was changed because of some of his stories. And I think absolutely government can have an impact. I think there's a lot moving even now about transparency and trying to push that forward. And I know there's been some laws that have passed that most hospitals are not complying with, right? And they're not posting prices and what they do post is so opaque and complicated, and you're thinking, well, how am I ever even going to find a price,
Yeah.
But there's other people who are developing tools to simplify that and to clarify it. And so there's resources out there, but it's not going to change until the people like you and I and every consumer of healthcare in America are the ones paying for this system. Until we stand up and until we fight back and we know what our rights are and we know how to make those choices for ourselves and our families, it's not going to change.
Yep.
Because the people at the top are just going to keep saying, give me
Well,
more
I
money.
think we need a baseline level or improve or increase the baseline level of literacy, healthcare
Yes.
literacy in the United States. It's not taught in schools, obviously. I mean, it's not even taught unless you go looking for the information. Nobody's saying, hey, you should be aware, like basic financial literacy or something like that, like how I take care of myself, whatever. How do I navigate the healthcare system in the United States? Nobody's teaching that outside of some of the work that you guys are doing. And then how do we scale that across hundreds of millions of people in the U.S. and make them care? I mean, I think you don't care until maybe you find yourself in the situation on the receiving end of some of this to where then it becomes important to you.
Yes.
And we just assume, I won't have to deal with that, so why would I bother learning? I think unfortunately, that's naive. Maybe that comes with time and age and wisdom, but I think everybody should understand what we're talking about. So kind of next steps, if you don't mind, like where should people go? So obviously they should check out the Substack. They should, of course, check out the Marshall Allen clone, the Mac. Of course, if you have not read Never Pay the First Bill, go get yourself a copy right away because you're missing a lot of information. But what else would you like as a call to action and before we close the episode up?
Yeah, I mean, MarshallAllenProject.org is our website. That is definitely, where we're trying to draw people. We also have a literacy curriculum that is accredited for continuing education for if you're a broker with NABIP or if you need continuing ed for HR it's accredited through SHRM. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there, and I think to add to your point of, I think that there's going to be there's becoming an increasing point of pain point where when you're like, oh, we're in debt. We're never going to be able to pay this bill off. We're now, we're facing collections and all of these kind of things. That is what's going to move people to say, I got to figure this out. Yeah. There's got to be someone who can help. There's got to be a place to go. And I would say go to the Mac.
Go to the Mac. That's awesome. Well, Sonja, I really appreciate you doing this, and it was very fun to get to share stories for you and for Marshall, and again shine a light on his work. I mean, this was important to me. I got to see him speak on a number of occasions. I assume you're available for speaking as well, right?
Yes.
If folks would like, if somebody wanted to reach out and connect with you to hire you for a speaking event, what are some of the things that you would want to talk about so they would be aware of that as well?
I mean, like I said before, I feel like I talk about Marshall and about his work and about his vision and his mission and then us carrying out that vision mission through the MAC and through the programs that we have available. So that's really kind of my area of expertise, I guess you could say, and interest. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wish you nothing but success, and I know you didn't intend to find yourself in this space, but I'm glad you are here, and I'm glad you're continuing his work. So I hope you guys do really well, and of course the boys, thinking about them as well, and maybe I'll end up sitting down with one of them 10 years from now because they're in healthcare as well.
Yeah.
This industry has a way of drawing people to it, even if they didn't intend to get into it. So thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.